So now Zani has been out for a couple of days, and I believe I can now fully give my opinions on her after her release. She has been an incredibly controversial character in the meta community, with a lot of people lamenting her limited team options, and a lot of people also lamenting that she is supposedly a new wave of power creep into the game. First, I wanted to talk about her performance in the Tower of Adversity, then her performance within Whimpering Wastes, and then finally I'm going to talk about the points in my pros and cons video, and if I was right about them or not. Starting with her performance in Tower of Adversity, in which, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it, this character is really strong. Pridwin rated her at tier 0 for a good reason. This character is undoubtedly one of the new strongest carries in the entire game when it comes to sheer damage output. I believe that Zani, alongside Carlotta and Phoebe, are now just the 3 definitive best carries when it comes to Tower of Adversity, with Jinshi and Camellia being behind them. Phoebe is technically worse than Zani when it comes to damage output. However, I believe Zani and Phoebe have a lot of differences within their kit that gives Phoebe some advantages. For example, her ranged playstyle, ability to stagnate enemies at will, as well as how she is incredibly safe to play and easy to recover from even if you do make a mistake. But that tangent aside, considering this video is about Zani and not about Phoebe, Zani was capable of dispatching nearly any chamber I put her on with ridiculous ease. This character does a lot of damage, and let me tell you, if you're playing her in her best team, this character literally cannot disappoint you unless the tower is so against her that she just won't clear. There truly is not that many words that I can use to describe Zani's performance because she's just incredibly powerful. She does have some flaws, obviously. There is no such thing as a perfect DPS. For example, despite Zani's damage reduction in her kit, I find myself dying with her more than other characters. This is because Zani is a berserker character. Her entire game plan is to just look at the enemy and go through all of their attacks and not care. She seems to have near infinite interruption resistance during her ultimate, and this paradoxically causes some issues for me, because I can't tell when I'm being hit. There's too many animations on the screen, and I'm not getting knocked on my ass. So sometimes I will die with this character, and I am 100% willing to admit that this is partially my fault. This is not a fault of the character inherently, but some attributes of the character's kit do cause problems for some people, and I do want to highlight that. Second of all, Zani's targeting in multi-target scenarios is incredibly funky. You'll be attacking one enemy, and suddenly Zani drags herself across the floor to hit someone else. This isn't inherently a bad thing, but it does cause some scenarios where Zani uses her fully powered up Heavy Slash Nightfall on an enemy that was 2 seconds away from their deathbed. However, at the end of the day, I believe these are all just nitpicks. These are not reasons you should just straight up skip Zani. They are so minor in fact that the only reason I included them in this video is because I felt like I just had to say more about this character. So honestly, I wouldn't hold this against Zani. Second of all, I wanted to talk about her performance within the Whimpering Wastes. As much as people seem to completely despise this game mode, I still have to talk about it. And yet again, Zani within Whimpering Wastes does not mess around. Zani has very good AoE on all of her heavy slashes, as well as having a consistent damage output, meaning that for Whimpering Wastes, this character is just really strong. However, there are some quirks about her that I want to mention. Her auto-targeting does come into play here again, more so than in the Tower of Adversity, because you're just dealing with multi-wave enemies that all like to spread around at times. So really, this is not something you can prevent here. So while there are some scenarios in which enemies will run away from you, causing you to have to also run away from the other enemies, this is not something that is new to characters within the game mode. GN has a very similar issue. He doesn't face this issue with small mobs, but this is definitely something that can happen to him with elites, and Zani suffers from the same thing. Obviously, I don't think Zani is as good as GN in this game mode. In all my testing, even with my extra investment on my Zani team, GN did still perform better than Zani. So while Zani is not exactly on GN's level, she is still incredibly powerful. Another big issue with Zani that I face is the fact that she just doesn't suit well for dual carry playstyles. You see, Whimpering Wastes is a game mode all about dealing with endless hordes of enemies, which means you need to have a consistent damage output in order for you to score high. So while Zani herself definitely has a very consistent damage output, her team does not. Zani's teams are incredibly restrictive, basically boiling down to Phoebe and Shorekeeper, or maybe Verena in place of Shorekeeper. But you really don't get that much flexibility in terms of your teammate options. And because these teammates don't do a lot of damage themselves, while you are setting up your supports, you're not really dealing that much damage, and thus you're not dealing with waves as efficiently. And because Zani is not very good at running dual carry teams, she is not capable of exploiting the inherent properties of dual carry to carry herself more in Whimpering Wastes. You're kind of forced to play her in her hypercarry playstyle, and thus, you are not dealing with waves 100% of the time. This is still a nitpick though, because Zani in her hypercarry team is still incredibly strong for the game mode, and if you play this team, you are going to deal a ridiculous amount of damage either way, and thus you are going to get high scores. After all, ever since the 2.2 update, Whimpering Waste has been gimped so much that I don't even think it's a challenge for basically any character that's already good in tower. Now I'm going to talk about the points in my pros and cons video, and I'm going to see if I was right about them or not. First of all, the fact that Zani would be an excellent DPS character. This is obviously right. I've had almost only good things to say about this character, and that still holds true. I knew she was easily going to clear the content ahead of her, assuming you played her correctly in good team, and this is just objectively correct. Zani is an excellent DPS. I'm still not fully sure on her pull value though, because she still needs Phoebe in her teams to get that strong performance. And if you already have a Phoebe on your account, you don't really need the Zani. But again, if you really do like Zani, you can just get her either way, and get the Phoebe after that so your Zani can have that incredible performance. The second thing I talked about in that video is that Zani's damage is very consistent throughout her rotation, meaning that she would be incredible for dealing with multi-wave, or anything of the sort that requires consistent damage output. I mentioned it in detail plenty of times throughout the video, especially during the Whimpering Waste section, so there's not much for me to say about this. Next up, I was talking about the fact that Zani would be our first Spectre damage amplifier. This is definitely true, she has Spectre damage amplification within her Ultra skill. However, I definitely overblew how strong this would be in practice. You see, the character that I believe this would be the strongest on was Phoebe. This is because Phoebe's damage output is not really centered around one specific damage type, so Generalist Spectre damage amplification would be the best way to buff her, and she also has Spectrofrazzle mechanics in her kit, meaning that it would synergize good with the fact that you need Heliacal Embers to be on the enemy to even get this amplification. However, the Heliacal Embers is ironically what makes this synergy not work. Heliacal Embers do not count as Spectrofrazzle, and thus Phoebe is unable to gain her Absolution buffs while there is a Zani in the team. So ultimately, there's not really any single character that likes having this Ultra skill buff. I did mention this in my previous video, and a lot of my comments said that this was good for Spectre Rover's damage output. However, Spectre Rover's damage output is not good enough to really justify this Ultra skill. It's like trying to buff your Cantarella with a Rochia. Like, sure, you could, but it's definitely far from optimal. I also mentioned in the pros and cons video that Zani would have incredible AoE, as well as very strong multi-wave. But I feel like I've already talked about these two enough within the Whimpering Waste section, so I don't need to waste more time on it. Yes, Zani has very good AoE, yes, Zani has very good multi-wave damage. I don't need to repeat this again. Now for the cons I said in that video. First of all, being her most glaring flaw, the fact that Zani is pretty expensive. You see, Zani is a very strange character within Wuthering Waves. She is the first character where it truly feels like her performance is actually gimped when not running a 5-star character. You see, Carlotta had similar things with Zhezha, but she still has Tao Chi and Yang Yang as alternatives for people who do not have a Zhezha. Zani doesn't really have anything like this. You could argue Spectre Rover, but Spectre Rover applies basically half the amount of Frazzle that Phoebe does, as well as not giving the 100% damage amplification that Phoebe has within her kit. So honestly, Spectre Rover is a massive downgrade compared to Phoebe. You could also argue that there is the Spectra Rover Mortefi team, but in my testing, this team cleared quite a bit slower than just the Phoebe Shorekeeper team. So honestly, it doesn't matter what way you spin it, not having Phoebe is a pretty big damper on your Zani. Obviously, like I said in the video, the Mortefi Rover team will still clear tower, but it's definitely still true that Zani is a more expensive DPS than most. Next, I talked about the fact that Zani would lose to Phoebe in terms of damage output, which I later corrected in the comments to say that they would be more close. Now, I don't know how to feel about this one. When it comes to calculations, Zani clears Phoebe by a landslide, it's not even close. But whenever I played Zani within tower, I really felt like the upgrade over Phoebe was not that massive. And on some bosses, Zani even cleared slower than Phoebe. For example, Crownless within the Overdrive Tower. This is because Phoebe has the range, which I mentioned earlier in the video. So honestly, when it comes to pure damage output, Zani is better than Phoebe, and I was wrong about this. However, I feel like there's just too many factors to say that one of them is definitively better. If I had to give the W to one of the two, it would be Zani. Her damage output is just higher. So I guess I'll concede and say I was wrong here, but I'm still conflicted about it. And then the final point that I mentioned was a pretty subjective point, being the fact that Zani's attacks looked slow. I no longer agree with this. Zani feels incredible to play, so honestly, just completely disregard that statement. But hey, what do you guys think of Zani? Be sure to let me know in the comments below, and while you're down there, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions, be sure to join my Discord, which is linked in the description. I'm pretty active in there, so if you ask me a question, there's a pretty good chance I'll respond. But that'll be it from me. Peace.